Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Kris, and yes, okay, this is number 3. This is the 100 Years' War, French Resurgence. I can say that word. Sorry, got a little candy in my mouth. So, this was a request, and I'm doing it. And for anyone who wonders, I'm still doing the Caesar series. I just don't have any videos yet.
At a lavish royal banquet taking place in late May of 1357, Edward III of England was accompanied by 2 of the most prestigious dinner guests in medieval history. On one side of him sat the captured King of Scotland, David II, and on the other was France's Valois king, Jean II. These priceless hostages were being displayed purposefully as an indicator of just how far the English kingdom of only around 4 million people had come. It had defeated the flower of medieval Europe twice and was now in a position to win the war. Though chaos reigned in the now kingless France, and Edward III believed his complete victory to only be a matter of time, the old land of Charlemagne would start to recover under the capable rule of Charles V. Welcome to our video on the Caroline phase of the 100 Years' War. And if you're looking for more documentaries to watch, the sponsor of today's video, Magellan TV, has a great... When the Black Prince removed his royal Valois prisoner from France, he also removed the anchor which kept the ship of state afloat. As military historian John Corrigan stated in his book, A Great and Glorious Adventure, France was effectively in a state of civil war. The 3 years following Poitiers were some of the worst in French history. Rabid discontent with the government spread like a plague among the nobility, and Paris's Third Estate even asserted its authority under the leadership of Etienne Marcel, a cloth merchant. This wasn't the end of it. Demobilized soldiers, deserters and common bandits from England, Gascony, France and even further afield went renegade and formed so-called routiers, or free companies.
I got a question. Okay, so France went into a 3-year kind of civil war, so to speak. How many times have they had a civil war or some kind of like a revolution? And I ask that because when they said that, I thought of the revolution in the early 1800s, late 1700s, early 1800s, which Napoleon sprang up out of. But how many of those have they been through in their history? And the reason why I'm asking is I can't really think of England going through those. I mean, and I know I'm sure there's been infighting, but I don't think I've actually done anything on England itself. Because most of what I know about England, they're always fighting overseas. I rarely hear of civil wars. So have they been through any? And if they have, does anyone know of any videos? Because that would be fascinating, because I don't ever hear about England, you know, with some civil war. I would hear about England and Scotland, and then England and, I don't know if they ever fought, I'm going to butcher the name, I apologize, Ireland? I know, you know, we say it Ireland, but that's not how they say it. It's Ireland or something. I apologize. But yeah, if anyone could point one of those out, that would be pretty cool, I think.
These bands of armed men roamed and ravaged the lawless countryside almost at will.
And if it is a common thing that, you know, it's happened 400 times throughout England's history, I apologize. I don't know much about other countries. I'm learning as I go. I'm American. There you
Serving
go.
any who would pay them, and sometimes even setting themselves up as robber barons in their own right. They would remain a problem for decades to come. Even in lands where feudal control was maintained, it didn't do France any good. Extortionate ransom payments paid to the English for the swath of high-born prisoners taken at Poitiers prompted a ruthless tax hike, and this finally inflamed the peasants into a revolt. A horrific bloodletting, known as the Jacquerie, began in the Oise Valley, with peasants lynching and murdering any noble they could get their hands on. The uprising lasted for weeks, before Charles of Navarre brutally put it down. Threatened by another large assault by Edward III, the beleaguered Dauphin signed the Treaty of Bretigny in October 1360, giving the Plantagenets all of Aquitaine, Ponthieu and Calais in return for the English king's renunciation of his own claim to the French throne, in addition to a £600,000 ransom for Jean's return. When 2/3 of the ransom had been paid, John II was allowed to return to France. However, one of his imprisoned sons escaped contrary to the agreement, which prompted the French king to voluntarily return to Edward's captivity in exchange for the younger Valois.
Wow. I'm going to guess he also did that so that the Edward III wouldn't hunt him down and kill him. So he was trading his life to go back there. It's a stand-up guy, though. I mean, to have done that.
He finally died there in 1364 and was succeeded as king by Charles V, whose accession was accompanied by a defeat in Brittany at Auray, which ended the succession war there. To deal with the rampaging Rotier and secure Castile as an ally in one move, the new king gathered a large force of Rotier under a Breton called Bertrand de Guesclin and sent them to install a friendly contender on the Castilian throne in 1365, Henry of Trastamara. The deposed king, Pedro the Cruel, went to the Black Prince, who was now Duke of Aquitaine, for help. Realizing the strategic benefit of having a friendly monarch in Castile, the French gathered an army and marched against Henry, defeating him at Nájera in 1367 and putting Pedro back on the throne. Unfortunately for him, this reign only lasted 2 more years before Henry assassinated his rival and took the crown once again. A Francophile was now firmly on Castile's throne. By the time Edward returned to Bordeaux in the late 1360s, he was growing ill from a disease contracted in Spain, and his direct rule in Aquitaine was creating discontent among long-time English subjects, not only the lands gained at Bretigny. To pay for his military campaigns and the court of Bordeaux, Aquitaine's overlord had been imposing harsh taxes for years, but when he declared yet another feuage or hearth tax in 1368, some of the highest feudal lords in the realm revolted, petitioning Charles V for assistance. It was the chance he had been waiting for. Technically, Charles no longer had sovereignty over Aquitaine, but used a loophole in the Treaty of Bretigny as an excuse to receive the discontented nobles, and again formally confiscate English possessions in France during late 1369. Despite attempted peace overtures by Edward III, Charles V was eager for revenge, and the war was back on. The French attacked immediately, seizing the thinly defended counties of Ponthieu and Rouergue with new tactics. Smaller mobile contingents of soldiers replaced the large massed armies which had been defeated at Crécy and Poitiers. Charles V also commanded that his generals refuse battle with the English, wary of suffering the bitter defeats of the 1340s and 1350s again. As Aquitaine's unwieldy new borders were being attacked, Edward III's son, John of Gaunt, launched a limited chevauchée in Normandy before withdrawing back to Calais not long after. In the following year, 1370, a notorious captain...
Why did he launch that attack only to go back? I thought there was going to be more to it than that. Okay.
Called Sir Robert Knowles, was contracted to lead 4,000 troops to do the same thing. They set out on a devastating raid from Calais, and from there, devastated northern France before approaching Paris.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got why he did it. Okay.
Again, Charles V restrained his knights from meeting the English in open battle, and Knowles's band moved further into France. Realizing he needed a military leader with whom he saw eye to eye, France's Valois king made the pragmatic Breton Rottier, Captain Bertrand de Guesclin, a formidable guerrilla leader who had previously served in Castile, the new constable of France. This new commander quickly made a base at Caen and raised a force to meet Knowles's 4,000 before marching after the English. Errors in coordination and internal division among the raiding army resulted in disaster in early December 1370, when Guesclin surprised and crushed it at the battles of Point-Vaillant and Var, destroying the chevauchée before it could inflict any real damage on the king's reputation.
No, I didn't understand why he had attacked and then he took off, and then the other guy comes in and attacks, and I'm like, oh yeah, they're still at war. Stupid. That's why he would attack.
In the south, French forces under Charles V's brother, the Duke of Anjou, continued the English disaster by capturing Agenais, Limousin and Bézec, with many local lords defecting from their Plantagenet overlords and going over to the Valois. The now ailing Black Prince was livid about the treachery of his lords, and reacted violently when the Bishop of Limoges, his own son's godfather, betrayed the town to the French. He marched there, stormed into the city, and brutally sacked it against all chivalric conventions, supposedly not even sparing women and children who begged at his feet. Sickly and demoralized by the death of his eldest son, the Black Prince went home to England in 1371, a tired man, leaving John of Gaunt in charge of Aquitaine. After Poitou was wrenched away from the Plantagenet crown in 1372, Edward III realised more help was needed, and so he sent the Earl of Pembroke to Aquitaine with 160 soldiers in 20 ships, 3 of which were larger battle-worthy vessels with archery towers on them. As Pembroke was approaching La Rochelle harbour at the height of a coastal inlet, however, he was confronted by a smaller fleet of Castilian combat galleys which were waiting for him to arrive. Castile's ships launched their attack first and came into close quarters with the outnumbering but outmatched English, inflicting a few losses among the non-combat craft. Nevertheless, Pembroke's meagre number of archers managed to do their job incredibly well, laying down a precise rain of arrows on the Iberian ships. At the same time, his spear-wielding men-at-arms managed to bravely fight off boarding attempts by the enemy until dusk, when the fleets separated. Pembroke sailed slightly out to sea and set anchor, while the Castilians waited just off La Rochelle until dawn the next day. The English were nervous. They couldn't escape because the enemy galleys were faster than their own ships, nor could they pass through the treacherous shallow waters of La Rochelle at low tide. However, some Poitevin knights and their retinues did row out to join the English during the night. Pembroke kept his ships anchored, not expecting an enemy attack until high tide. However, the Castilian ships used their shallower draft and closed on the English while they were still immobile, spraying their decks and rigging with oil before lighting the fuel with flaming arrows. This was the end of the battle, in a complete victory for France's Iberian ally. Many of the English...
That is devious, and yet genius. Wow, I just thought, oh, they're going to go in for another sneak attack. Well, this probably won't work. That's...
were burned alive, most of their ships were destroyed, and Pembroke himself was taken prisoner. English naval superiority, established at Sluys in 1340, met its end at La Rochelle, and a planned expedition by Edward III himself was cancelled. The next year, John of Gaunt led around 10,000 men out from Calais on the so-called Great Chevauchée, laying waste to a massive swath of land on his march all the way to Bordeaux. Nevertheless, the French did not engage the English in pitched battle, instead harassing John's vulnerable supply lines and picking off any stragglers or raiding columns which strayed too far. This effectively limited the damage, and even though the chevauchés pulled Valois soldiers away from Aquitaine, by the close of 1373, almost all of the province was under French control. English territory in France had been reduced to its pre-war levels once again. Rather than covering each small-scale military action over the next decade, we'll cover the crucial dynastic politics which begins to affect the course of the war from this point on. In the June of both 1376 and 1377, England suffered a great loss. The bedridden Black Prince, formerly the great model of medieval chivalry, succumbed first, followed the year after by his legendary father, Edward III, who perished after a reign of half a century, widely viewed as a golden age for the Kingdom of England. His successor was Richard II, second son of the Black Prince. Since he was still a minor, however, true authority would be wielded by a regency council until the king came of age. Only days after Richard...
What would coming of age be? In those days, would it be like 16? 18? 21? I mean, 12? I have no idea what the coming of age would be.
II's coronation.
Has to be kind of young, because they didn't live as long. Could be 18 though. 16. Makes sense. I don't know.
The boy king's realm was beset by a series of lightning ship-borne raids on its channel ports. From Rye in the east to Plymouth in the west, the French pirates, led by a talented knight and admiral called Jean de Vienne, used their dominance of the sea to viciously plunder and loot.
Now, were they attacking England because the Black Prince is gone and Edward III is gone? And I'm guessing there was probably a little bit of fear with those, because they didn't really seem to fight them. I mean, they didn't take the fight to them, is what I mean. There's probably a total lack of respect for a kid.
His political situation also changed when in mid-September 1380, Charles V the Wise, France's Valois monarch who had held his kingdom together in its darkest hour and doggedly led the reconquest of Aquitaine, died of an illness. He left the crown to the 11-year-old Charles VI, also a minor. This situation gave the king's 4 uncles, the so-called Princes of Blood, an opportunity to form a regency council as well, the Dukes of Anjou, Berry, Bourbon and Burgundy. The Duke of Burgundy, Philippe the Bold, was the younger son who was captured with Jean II at Poitiers in 1356, and his dynasty would bring Burgundy to power in the 15th century. Unfortunately for France, the regency also gave the dukes an opportunity to exploit their positions to gain more power, and they squandered the carefully maintained treasury of Charles V. The political situation had changed again in both kingdoms by the late 1380s, as both kings asserted their independent rule. In France, Charles VI embarked on a personal rule, dismissing the Valois magnates from his council in November of 1388, and replacing them with a group of his father's old advisors, known as the Marmosets. His rule started well, and the people began to call their king the Beloved. But on the other side of the English Channel, Richard II's reign descended into a tyranny throughout the last decade of the 14th century. While the king managed to forge a 28-year truce with the French, his internal problems began to get worse. This all came to a climax when John of Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, was cast out of England for 10 years as a political threat. The former didn't react to his son's exile, but when Gaunt died in 1399, and Richard II both extended his banishment to life and confiscated his vast Duchy of Lancaster, the Rubicon had been crossed. Henry Bolingbroke returned and landed at the Humber estuary in June, and almost immediately most of Richard's nobles deserted him, unnerved by the king's actions. Richard, who had travelled to Ireland to put down a rebellion there, was deposed and died a few months later in prison, while the House of Lancaster became the
How old was he when he died?
Royal House of England when its usurping patriarch came to the throne as Henry IV. As the 15th century approached, it seemed as though internal strife in England and wise rule in France would set the tone for another generation. However, a single figure would turn that state of affairs on its head and reignite the English war effort, Henry V. Our story of the 100 Years' War will continue soon.
There's so many Henrys and Charles that have been in rule. I'm losing track of who's who. I have a very important statement to make here. England and France. You guys fought a lot of wars against each other. It's enough. We're done. No more. How many battles have they had? How many fights? I mean, not just like, oh, well, there's a skirmish here and a fight there. I mean, like, how many wars? All-out wars. Because it's been a lot. From my vantage point, it seems like it's a lot. But I tell you what, when France and England are fighting on the same side, then you know whoever they're fighting against really has been in the wrong. Because those two, it doesn't seem like they come together very often. But when they do, that other side, typically, yeah, they've really screwed up. Okay, I'm going to end this here. This was the third video in this series, and I'm enjoying it. Not a lot of battles. It really does kind of, like you said, 20-some years of peace. So, I you know, the peace is always tentative, apparently. But, yeah, it's been pretty good. But I'm going to end this here. Like and subscribe. Appreciate the watch. Appreciate the view. Throw a comment in there. Say something about how distinguished the gray is. Got a little bit down there. A little bit. Oh, you can't see it. That's a little bit over there. But until next time, you're just going to have to imagine. Oh, no, you can watch other videos. There you go. Have a good day. Have a good night.